Hi, this is Ash from 39 Studios, back again with a new review. This time we're going to be looking at Coffee Talk and its sequel, Coffee Talk 2. For those who don't know, Coffee Talk series is a visual novel where you play as a barista in Seattle, but it's fantasy Seattle, but still Seattle. Basically, you just serve people and other creatures coffee. They say it's the best coffee in the world because he's the best barista, but it's Seattle in America. Have you ever tasted the coffee there? Anyway, Coffee Talk 1 came out in 2020, and the sequel came out in 2023. The games were made by Tonggu, which is an Indonesian company and game development studio. The name of the studio in Indonesian actually means beansprout, which makes the game actually very fitting. As I said before, these are both visual novels where you serve coffee to people. The game's mostly just talking to people as you serve them coffee, with moments where you gotta make sure you get the order right. This is the main gameplay hook of the game, just speaking to people and serving coffee. In terms of visuals, the game looks gorgeous with its pixel art. It gives a very lo-fi art style, which is the main influence for the game. If you're really into pixel art, you're gonna love the game just for the visuals alone. Anyway, back to the gameplay. Like any visual novel, the main bread and butter of the gameplay is listening and speaking to people, learning the stories and going through it. Unlike most visual novels which have a grand narrative, Coffee Talk doesn't really have that. It has more individual stories. This happens over a 14-week period in both games. However, the main difference between the two games is how the stories are told and how the characters interact with these stories. This will be explained later in the video. The second gameplay is making coffee, which makes sense because that's what the game is called. Coffee Talk. Duh. The second part of the gameplay, making the coffee, is pretty simple. You get a base, you then select a couple items, and then boom, you've made your coffee. The main gist is making sure you get the correct coffee for the right customer. They'll tell you what they want. There'll be a little encyclopedia for all the coffees you made, if it matches up, or you're just gonna figure it out. Usually you get enough contact clues to figure out what they actually want, or it might even just tell you. But some of them you have to actually figure out for story purposes. As the game won't explicitly tell you this until you get to the ending, but there is multiple endings that you can get in both games. Each ending is slightly different, but gives you more context for the wider story and lore of the game. Besides that, there's nothing really much else to the game. There's an endless mode, as well as a little stat book for the characters, but besides that, nothing really else. The sequel doesn't add much to the first one, only adding hibiscus and butterfly blue pea tea to the mix, which is why I included them both in one video rather than a separate video, as the gameplay and the story is very similar to each other. In fact, one of my biggest gripes with the second one is that it doesn't reinvent the wheel enough. It makes it feel more like a DLC rather than a whole new game. Now, if you're into cozy gaming, you should definitely play this game. Easy. In fact, any visual novel enjoyer might like this game. But keep in mind, it is a very chill game. So if you want anything super serious, you're not going to find it here. Okay, now onto the more in-depth analysis of the game. In my opinion, out of the two, Coffee Talk 1 is the one that you should play over the sequel. As I kind of said, the sequel did feel like a glorified DLC at some moments, and I think the main reason for this is how Coffee Talk 1 and Coffee Talk 2 portray their stories, as I said at the beginning of the video. Coffee Talk 1 and 2 may structurally seem similar in terms of storyline, but it's really not, and when you're playing it, you'll feel it. How Coffee Talk 1 is structured is that there's individual characters with small story arcs that don't usually overlap with each other until the second week, which then influence the events of their storyline to the conclusion, versus Coffee Talk 2. Coffee Talk 2, however, has two main storylines that all integrate together pretty much. These two structures in mind make the experience feel very different, and some people are going to prefer the first game or the second game. Up to personal preference, in my opinion, the first one resonated more with me. An example of this is in first game, Freya's and Gale's storylines do not merge. They stay separate. Though they interact with each other and do input into their storylines, they do not affect it in the grand scheme of things. In the end, those characters are affected by the player's action giving them the right coffee, as well as the characters' motivations. This is the same for all the characters in Coffee Talk 1. If they're in one storyline, that's their storyline. They pop up in this other people's storyline to help them grow, but they never actually merge their storylines together, and that the storylines are segregated. This is the opposite of what happens in Coffee Talk 2. Coffee 2, for example, Georgie's and Naina's storyline, they merged together at the end of things. At the beginning, they were separate, and then they merged. Meaning that Coffee Talk 1 has about 6 storylines versus Coffee Talk 2, which has about 2 to 3-ish. Including smaller storylines, I'm talking about major ones. Now, why is this the case? I think there is a clear reason for this. I think Coffee Talk 1 is more about the individual stories versus Coffee Talk 2, which is more about the emotional themes of the storyline. Coffee Talk 2 cares more about thinking about things, understanding emotions, seeing the bigger picture, versus Coffee Talk 1, which is more about grounded, more individual. Though it did speak about bigger themes, I feel like the sequel talks about a lot more and is more integrated into the storylines of the two main stories. And I think that's why I prefer the first one. I just prefer that individual, more grounded story versus number 2's more existential mumbo jumbo, I guess, for lack of better words. But some people are going to prefer the sequel's approach on this. So keep that in mind when you go ahead and play the game. That you might prefer number 1 but not like number 2, or you might prefer number 2 and not like number 1 storyline, or you might like both. Because I did like the sequel, I just felt that the first one hit me more overall, versus the sequel, which did have its strong moments, but not as strong as the first one in my opinion. Now, I've been shit-talking the sequel, but it does have some improvements over the first one, so it's not a complete DLC. The sequel has a new item system. Basically, customers give you items that they want to give to other customers. If you give them the items, good. If you don't have to though, this branches out into different storylines, but it adds a little bit more depth to the situations. The system also adds and improves the ending system, as I kind of said at the beginning, that there's multiple endings. The sequel, I find, is better at this approach because the item system, as well as incorrectly making coffee, adds a bit more dynamicism to the situation. But in the end, as I said in the middle of the video, I'd recommend both of them for anyone to play. They're pretty cozy games, pretty cheap, get it on sale, you won't regret it. And that's the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification buttons, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Now,